Hi, this is Ray Stundle. Thank you so much for watching this exciting episode with the Napoleon Hill Ezine. I'm joined with Judy Williamson from the Napoleon Hill Foundation for another exciting topic. And today what we're going to talk about is all about change and why we really need to embrace change. Judy, why don't you share with our audience one of the quotes from Napoleon Hill and his thoughts on change?
I'd be happy to. Napoleon Hill says very succinctly this not so profound but very simplistic statement on change, and I want to read it to you. He says, "Strange also is the fact that only one thing is permanent in this universe, eternal change. Nothing remains exactly the same for even a second. Even the physical body in which we live changes completely with astonishing rapidity." That's what Napoleon tells us, and I think we all have to agree on that, even though we may not want to acknowledge it. So, what are your thoughts on that, Ray?
Well, I absolutely agree. I mean, change is a part of life. Everything is changing. Our bodies are changing, our jobs are changing, our businesses are changing, the economy is changing. Change is a constant. And I think the most successful people, at least one of the attributes that they have, is that they have the ability to adapt to change. And I think that's something we really need to explore in this video of how do we adapt to change and how do we really be productive while change is occurring. And as I was thinking about this, Judy, it kind of got me back to thinking about the law of cycles and understanding, as we talk about in this edition of the newsletter, we talk about, for example, seasons changing. And we can think about the tide comes in, the tide goes out. There's a cycle. The gestation period to have a baby, 9 months. There's a cycle, and the body of the woman changes, right? So there's the law of cycles is directly related to this. And as we think about laws of cycles, I also started to think about the law of cause and effect. It's funny how we keep talking about the law of cause and effect, but it's so relevant to so many of our topics. And with the law of cause and effect, we start to ask ourselves, what is the cause that is leading to this effect? And we're going to explore that, I think, in this video to really identify what is the cause that is leading to the change and what is the effect of the change if we do not adapt to the change. What do you think?
Well, I liked your example before when we were talking about, putting a seed into the ground and then looking at what it takes to make that seed sprout and blossom and grow and blossom, whether it's rain, sunshine, good earth, and things like that. It's all the situation that seed is placed in. And so if we think about that relevant to our lives, when we're desirous of a change, we have to give ourselves some customized situations to make a positive change versus a negative change, because it's really our choice. One of the ideas that Napoleon Hill frequently talks about, and it seems simplistic too, but it's very profound, is that we cannot hold two thoughts simultaneously in our mind at one time. And if you try to have a negative thought and then you try to have a positive thought, they not only cancel each other out, you're confused. And so which thought's going to win? Which thought's going to be the one that we're going to choose to enact in our lives? And we're the controller of those thoughts. We're the one person that can make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Our body doesn't make that decision. Our emotions do not make that decision. We mentally, we cognitively make that decision ourselves, and we decide I'll have a positive day or I'll have a negative day. It's our choice. And that's a profound opportunity in our lives too. Even though we go through the eternal process of change, whether it's good or bad change as we may decide to describe it, we control the outcome, good or bad.
Well, that's a fantastic point, and that really ties into perception and how we perceive things around us, which makes me think of this phrase called objective reality. So reality, there is one reality. The question is, how do we perceive it? And then how do we then respond to our perceptions? And then we have to pay the consequences, good or bad, based on our perceptions. So I think step number one when we deal with change is we need to embrace objective reality. We need to be rational and take a look at what are the inputs, outputs, what's the cause, what's the effect, why are things changing, understand it, accept it that it's changing, and then really then spend the majority of our time in a positive mental attitude of how we are going to be successful in adapting to the change. I think that's really key. Now, based on kind of what you mentioned and what I just finished talking about, I think that there is an approach that we can recommend to our viewers to consider when change is happening around them, and how do we respond to the change. And we look down from time to time. I made a few notes that it's important that I share this correctly with you. When we have change in our life, one of the things that we feel inside of us, I believe, is fear, frustration, doubt, anxiety, and if untreated, and I don't mean treated medically speaking, but if it's not dealt with, it turns into depression. And we kind of go down this negative spiral of reinforcing this negativity within us. And what does that really lead to? It leads to low self-confidence. And why? Because we don't think we can adapt to the change. Whether that's losing a job or losing an important customer, or we're becoming unhealthy and we're gaining weight, we become depressed because we don't know how to adapt to this change, to reverse it or to change the direction to be in a better position. So as we go through this process, we have to ask ourselves, how do we get ourselves out? How do we get unstuck? How do we get out of this funnel? And Judy, we were talking about this before we started the video here. It comes down to, in many cases, to once we understand that a change is happening, we need to figure out what knowledge we need, what education we need, so that we have the tools in our tool belt to deal with the change. And as we get the tools and the theoretical knowledge, then we need to go and apply that knowledge so that we can get some feedback, also known as results, which could be good or bad. It's feedback. It's not neither good or bad. It's just simply feedback, which we then take and we re-inject back into the cycle to get more knowledge, apply more, and then you're going to get the results that you're hopefully looking for. And what's really amazing at this point is that once you start to build some positive results in your life in a specific area of change, that leads to some self-confidence. You start to have some small wins, which become bigger wins, and then what happens? The level of doubt in our mind, the level of frustration, the depression goes away, the anxiety goes away, because now we know inside of us that we can handle the change. And at that point in time, if something undesirable should happen, we know that we have the tools and the mindset and everything at our fingertips to move forward, and not only just move forward, but to thrive and get to the next level of where we need to be because we've invested in ourselves. What do you think about that, Judy?
As you were talking, I remember, and I can verify that many people come to study Napoleon Hill's courses because they're going through a change process in their lives. And fortunately, it goes on two sides of the coin here. They focus in on learning from adversity and defeat, principle number 13 that Napoleon Hill talks about. And they come into the class looking for tools, looking for ways to work themselves out of this process because they know they're stuck, they know they're frustrated, they know they're fearful, they know they have all these characteristics and they don't like themselves at that point in time, and they want to find a way to get beyond. And also they want to understand why they're in that situation that they're in. And one of the teaching tools that we use is, I refer back to Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she, in her career, devoted her entire medical career to studying the death and dying process of children, of terminally ill children. And she came up with the conclusion that they just didn't live and die. They went through a change process that took them from being ill to being dead, essentially. And what she told us was that we need to figure out in our lives too how this process works. And as I studied that process, I said, this is exactly the same thing that we go through with change. We die to our old self and we create a new self. And one of the final steps in her process before the change occurred was depression. And so many people in class say, I'm depressed, I don't know where to go. I said, it's good, because that means you're on almost the last stage of change, and when you get out, you're going to do something really exciting. And their eyes light up and they say, well, maybe there is hope. Maybe there's some way I can get beyond this. And I think just looking at that process and noting that it doesn't happen instantaneously overnight. We don't get better tomorrow if we feel down today, but it's a sequential process that we can create opportunities in our lives to become more positively minded people just by localizing where we're at right now and anticipating where we want to be in the future. And I know it does work. I've seen remarkable accomplishments for people in the classroom when they've had this situation, whether it's a death in the family, it's problems with children, it's problems with companions, relationships are bad, whatever. They may have their own drug, alcohol, and abuse problems. And when they can pinpoint it and they can identify it and look at the process, they begin to find the way out of the spiral that you talked about. And instead of funneling down, they're cycling up. And it's a good way to be.
Oh, what a wonderful perspective. That's very interesting. You know, it also kind of got me thinking about it. If you think about in your life where you've had the greatest upward mobility, whether that would be in a relationship, whether that would be in your job or a pay increase, or going from being unhealthy and, for lack of a better word, fat, to becoming athletic and being in better shape, being healthier. If you think about these examples, one of the things I have noticed, at least in my life, is that we, as you know, respond to both pain and pleasure. These are our two major things that cause us to move. When we ultimately get to the point where we're like unhappy, we are like, enough is enough. And in most cases, not all, because certain cases of change, like talking about a death in the family or things of that nature, it's certainly a different situation. But if we think about business, if we think about our health, if we think about relationships, and many times it's these lows that permit us to really step out and allows the new highs to take place. And I think when we acknowledge and realize, and we talk about the idea of cycles, which we talked about earlier in a previous video, is when there is a low, it allows us to have momentum to build to a new high, and to embrace it and realize it, that that is going to help feed you and push you along.
That's absolutely true. And another thought is, if you're not in the change process, if you're not in the growth process, then you're in the dying process. And you could die to yourself and die to your goals and achievements before you physically die. And that, why suffer two or more deaths? Why not just do what you're put here to do on this planet and live a glorious life? And when your time comes to transition, then transition with a positive legacy. That would be the best way to go out, I guess. Rather than flicker out little by little, have a big, spectacular fireworks show and go out. When you think of all the wonderful people that have passed on recently and in the past, those people lived their life to the fullest, and they used every time, every minute that they had. And I'm sure if they had it all to do over again, they would do exactly the same thing.
What a wonderful way to finish this video, and thank you so much for that perspective. I hope all of you watching at home enjoyed this video, enjoyed this specific edition of the Ezine. We strongly recommend that you share it with your friends, with your family, with your colleagues at work. There's really a whole wealth of knowledge and really important information that we're sharing with you, that you can dive into Napoleon Hill's books and related materials to really understand how you can get yourself on the high road, the road that's going to take you to live the best life possible for you based on how you define it, because you only have one shot at this life and you need to make it the best that you can. So with that, Judy, thank you so much for another exciting talk, and we look forward to sharing with you our next exciting episode. So make sure you tune in.
Thank you.